Hello, and welcome to another episode of Quick and Nerdy, an MSP-friendly how-to channel dedicated to Veeam-powered BAS and DRAS offerings. As always, I'm your host, Brandon McCoy, Systems Engineer Advisor, supporting our Veeam Cloud service providers. And today, this is one of my newest videos where we're rounding out the end of 2024, and I gotta be honest, this should have been one of the first videos that I ever did. I've been here for around 7 years, and I've worked almost exclusively with service providers. And over the years, I've realized that I get a lot of the same questions, a lot of the same concerns, and frankly, a lot of the same needs. So while Veeam has all types of products, and I try to capture as much as I can with this how-to series just to kind of cut some of the time it takes to get on a live demo. And obviously, we're not going to be able to answer every question in every scenario with a video, but I think if you're new to Veeam, and if you're looking for image-based backups for virtual machines, physical machines, backing those up to the cloud and having a central management platform to kind of monitor everything, this is the video for you. So I'm going to try to make this as quick as possible. We're going to jump right in. Let's start with an agenda. And so we're going to start with 2 deployment options. We're going to talk about the pros and cons of each of those, also mixing and matching. So you can do one or the other or some sort of combination. We'll talk about that. We'll also talk about 3 different cloud options that you can use. And then depending on how much time we have, I'll jump into the GUI. I'll show you around. And of course, if this video doesn't answer all your questions, reach out to your sales rep. I'd love to do a demo with you or someone else on my team. And we'll go from there. So let's just get started. So I'd like to start by drawing out this diagram. Now again, this is just for your image-based backups, and this isn't going to be the answer for every environment, but 90% of the calls that I have, seriously, are this exact conversation. Okay? So typically I talk to partners who have customers with either one or the other or some sort of combination of the scenario. Okay, so A, they've got virtualized environment. B, they've got some physical endpoints or some kind of combination. They want to send those backups to the cloud. They want to back up locally and then copy those backups to the cloud so they achieve that 3-2-1 rule. And then they need some kind of single pane of glass, right? So I always start off by saying, well, Veeam is just software. Now, that has always been kind of one of my go-to statements is that Veeam is just software. However, I am having to modify that as now we do have a few hosted services for 365. Veeam also has something called Veeam Data Vault, where we've partnered with Microsoft to offer some cloud storage. If you need some information about that, happy to talk about that, but really we're going to just focus with kind of the traditional Veeam approach with service providers, and I'm going to leave out the part of Veeam's cloud, and there's a few reasons why, but I just kind of want to keep this simple, okay? So for now, let's just keep it with the Veeam is just software, bear with me. And so we're going to talk about these deployment options. So the first scenario is your customer has a virtualized environment. VMware, Hyper-V, maybe some of the newer ones that we support like Proxmox, Nutanix. And so again, they've just got some VMs on a host, maybe multiple hosts, right? And for those customers, we're going to deploy our core product, which is called Veeam Backup and Replication. That is something that is installed on a Windows machine at the client site, and it hooks in to the hypervisor directly and takes agentless backups and sends those to your repository. The second option is customers who have physical machines. These could be laptops for people that are never in the office, always on the road. This could be workstations. These could be physical file servers. And for those customers, we simply deploy agents. We have agents for Windows, Linux. We even have Mac agents, AIX, Unix. There's a whole bunch of them. But for this, we're just kind of keep it simple. Most of the agents I see are Windows-based with a few Linux. Most of the hypervisors I see are VMware and Hyper-V. Okay? So these 2 solutions can also be sort of some combination. So for instance, you could have a backup and replication server at the bottom left corner, right? So customers have physical machines, but you still want to use a Veeam server. This could be for additional functionality that the Veeam server provides. And as we go through this, that'll become more clear as to which method that you want to use. But again, typically it's one or the other. For customers who have a virtualized environment, it's a Veeam server. For customers who have physical, it's agents. Keep in mind that, let's say a customer had a Hyper-V host, which is 2 VMs, an Active Directory and a file server, and they can't or they don't want to spin up another Windows machine for the Veeam server. You can always use agents on those. So an agent doesn't have to be installed on a physical machine. It can be installed on a virtual machine, but they are typically use cased for physical machines. Okay? So in either scenario, they will typically have some local storage. Now, you don't have to have local storage. You can back up directly to the cloud. But for the 3-2-1 rule, 3 copies of your data on 2 devices with 1 offsite, we do recommend that you have some local storage. This could be a NAS. This could be the Veeam server itself, a SAN, a Windows or Linux hardened repository. And we're going to back up to that repository. Now, on the right-hand side of the screen, what I'm going to do is I'm going to build out the service provider environment. So this would be your environment. Now, if you don't have a data center or rack space, don't worry. I'm going to talk about some additional options. But if you do have somewhere to spin up a machine or two and maybe even provide the storage, this is what we would build out on the right-hand side. So the first thing we do as a service provider is install a Veeam server, just like the customer, same product, Veeam Backup and Replication. But instead of using the regular licenses that a customer would, we're going to give you something called a Cloud Connect license. So Cloud Connect is free for most operations. So if customers want to send a backup to you and you are managing their environment with your rental licensing, then Cloud Connect is free. Okay, there's some other things that are not free, like replicating their data center to yours. I'm not going to get too into the weeds on all of the licensing types and things like that, but for now, just know that your Cloud Connect license is installed on your Veeam server, and we now refer to this as Cloud Connect server. Even though it is backup and replication, because of the license and its use case, it's going to lock out the traditional Veeam backup and replication functionality of creating backup jobs, and is instead going to be used to build out your infrastructure and offer BAS and DRAS. Okay? So once you have your Cloud Connect server, the next step from that server in the GUI is you're going to install an SSL certificate. You can have Veeam generate one for you for self-signed, but we do recommend that at some point you get your own self-signed certificate through GoDaddy or use a wildcard. After you have that certificate installed, you're going to deploy something called a Cloud Gateway. Now, the Cloud Gateway is an application, or rather, it's a service that is installed on a Windows machine. It can be installed on its own Windows machine, or in small environments, it can be installed on the same machine as your Cloud Connect. Okay, you can even have multiple cloud gateways, and we'll use some round-robin load balancing with DNS, so that multiple customers can use multiple gateways. If one goes down, you've got some high availability. And what this gateway does is it enables TLS, or Transport Layer Security, basically an upgraded version of SSL, and this eliminates the need for a VPN from the customer so that they can A, send backups to you, or B, send their replica VMs to you for a full-blown DR. Okay, we'll get into that in a little bit. So now that I've got my Veeam Cloud Connect server, I've deployed one or multiple gateway servers. The next thing is I want to add the Veeam Service Provider console. So this is a free tool, and it is going to hook up to your Cloud Connect/gateway so that all of your customers will appear in this single pane of glass, and you can do different types of job management, visibility, licensing, reporting. As a service provider, I highly recommend you use the Service Provider console. Okay, it's going to make your life a lot easier. And again, all these components you see on the right, they can be installed on one single Windows machine, but it really depends on the size of the environment, and I would recommend that you read through some of the documentation in order to figure out if you need to split these up. They can always be split up at a later time as well. Okay, so now that you have this in place, the next thing is to add the type of resources you want to offer your customer. The first would be just a regular repository. So just like the repository on the left is in some cases a Veeam backup and replication repository or just an agent repository. It is the same thing on the right side. You add that repository into your Cloud Connect server, but then Cloud Connect allows you to slice that up and give pieces of it to your customers, right? So they'll each have their own repository. And if you also want to offer full-blown DR with replication, you can put a VMware or Hyper-V host in your data center behind Cloud Connect as well. Now, I did purposely put a hypervisor icon generically on the left side and a VMware Hyper-V icon on the right because today, Cloud Connect replication, or actually any type of replication, like Veeam replication, is only supported for VMware and Hyper-V, okay? All right, so that is kind of the high-level architecture. Hopefully that's starting to make sense a little bit. And again, if you don't have Rackspace or Data Center and you want to use some of these tools, you can always spin these machines up in Azure or AWS. I believe Azure has some marketplace AMIs that already have the software installed on it. And you can also leverage another service provider, which we'll get into in a moment. Okay. All right, so let's get into the two different scenarios on the customer side, and then we'll finish it out with the different cloud options. So let's start with having a Veeam backup and replication, or VBR, on-prem at the client site. So this is our core product. So almost all of the really nice functionality, the newer features, are going to be found in this core product. That's not to say that we don't upgrade agents, because we do. The agents, I think, are on like version, 8, I think, at this point. It's hard to keep up because we move so fast. But backup and replication has a lot more functionality, to be totally frank. So the first thing, let's talk about the pros. So the pros of having a Veeam server on-prem is that you can do a backup copy job. So what that means is we do a primary job from production and send it to a local repository, and then we create a backup copy job that does exactly that. It copies the backup from the local repository to a secondary repository, i.e. your cloud or even another location at the client site. The Veeam server also has more restore options, okay? So we're talking the ability to do instant VM recovery. I can spin virtual machines up on a different hypervisor. I can send those VMs to the cloud and restore them as Azure VMs, AWS VMs. I can even take a physical machine. So maybe you are using agents, but you also have a Veeam server there locally. Maybe that Veeam server is a physical Windows machine, and it even has the Hyper-V role enabled on it. In that scenario, I can spin up my physical machine backups as Hyper-V VMs and run them directly on the Hyper-V server. Okay, there's some other ones as well, but those are kind of some of the big ones. Also, we have a feature in Backup and Replication Enterprise and Enterprise Plus called Sure Backup. This is the verification of machine backups by actually spinning them up on a hypervisor. So you need a hypervisor, either VMware or Hyper-V, and we'll spin the machines up instantly from a backup file in an isolated environment. We'll fence it off from production. We'll do a ping test. We'll do a VMware Tools heartbeat test or a Hyper-V integration check. This even works for physical machines. So again, kind of mixing those deployments. I have a Veeam server. I'm using agents. I can still spin those up on a Hyper-V or a VMware host and verify those machines. Okay, those are the three. There's probably a few others, but those are the three that stand out to me the most of why you should have a backup and replication server on-prem. Now, the cons of having a backup and replication server on-prem. It requires a Windows instance, okay? This could cost money to the client or to you as the service provider. So you have to decide, is that worth it? You know, if you have two physical machines or even two virtual machines and it's just basic stuff, maybe you just use agents, right? So the Veeam server, it really needs its own Windows instance. That could be a virtual machine, a physical machine. It doesn't have to be a server edition. We do support Workstation as well, depending on the OS you're running. And the other con is that the agents if you decide that you want to use agents, but you want to manage it from a local backup and replication, all the job management has to be done from that Veeam server. So at site A, you log into that Veeam server. At site B, you log into that Veeam server. Okay. So let's compare that to the standalone agents. So the standalone agents, the pros are pretty much the cons of the VBR server, right? The opposite of those. So the pros is there's little to no overhead. The agents are still installed directly on the machines. You can back up directly to the cloud in any scenario, so you really don't have to have any hardware. All the jobs are managed by the service provider console. So a big point about managing these agents. Let's say you have 10 customers. Each one of these customers has 10 agents. Every single one of those machines needs an agent with its own backup job, the license, everything. So using the service provider console, I can push out all 100 of those agents to all my customers in mass, right? One customer, I put 10 agents, one customer, 10 agents, and manage all of these jobs with templates and policies. I can control the jobs, I can edit the jobs, all from the service provider console. Okay. Side note, you can still hook your backup and replication into your service provider console for visibility, but a lot of the job management is not available. Okay, but for agents, it is. Also, the license. I'll put a single license on my service provider console to manage all of my agents, and anytime an agent job is kicked off, it consumes from this master agent. This is going to help when you have to update your licenses. It'll do it automatically using the service provider console. The other pro, just kind of trying to match these up, one to one. So this isn't a big deal, but the workstation agent is cheaper than the standard license for a virtual machine. Now that's only for VM, so you can't use a workstation. I mean, you can't use backup and replication standard on a physical machine. You can use it on a hypervisor, but you can use an agent on a virtual machine, right? So if you wanted to save, it's only 1 point difference, but if you wanted to save a few points here and there, you could use a workstation agent versus having backup and replication with the standard for VMs, okay? Now, the downside of using standalone agents, like I said, this is kind of the opposite of the pros for VBR. There's no backup copy job. So if you want to do two jobs, like one local, one to the cloud, you have to create two separate jobs. They have to run at different times, and they both come from production. There's no additional cost for that from a Veeam perspective. We only charge per machine, but it is two jobs with two different schedules. There's limited restore, so you can restore the full machine, bare metal restore, even on dissimilar hardware. You can restore a specific volume, or you can do a file restore, and you can even do that file level restore from the service provider console. But there's no ability to do like a SQL table rollback, restore an Active Directory user to a previous time or state. And the only way to verify your backups is using our health check. This is going to crawl the repository and compare the metadata index, do a CRC check against the backup files compared to the metadata. They can swap blocks out on the fly. So this is still very helpful, but it's just not as good, in my opinion, as actually spinning the machine up to do the test. Okay, so hopefully that helps you kind of get an idea of what you need, depending on the type of customer you have and the requirements you need. Let's keep things moving, and finally, we'll talk about cloud options. So you have three options for the cloud. Now, again, I'm not talking about using Veeam Data Vault, I believe it's called. So this is Veeam's packaged cloud that's just using Azure, and there are some benefits to that, some pros to that. It is a little pricier than using something like a Wasabi. I know that's very popular within the service provider community, but I'm just going to keep it to these three options if you're not using the Veeam Data Vault. Okay, so the first option is build out your environment just like I showed on that first slide, right? Use your own rack space or whatever. Spin up Cloud Connect and offer your repositories or your hypervisors for BAS and DRAS. Now, this is the most hands-on. This is the most, it's all on you, kind of do it yourself, but it's also going to give you the most margin because we don't charge you for Cloud Connect backup on the rental program. Okay. The second option is to use object storage. You can also use a hypervisor like an Azure virtual machine, an AWS EC2 instance, but frankly, there's not really too many reasons to use a virtual machine with managed disks and a hyperscaler. Maybe you could get some better speeds with like real high-end SSDs, but honestly, using object storage, something like Wasabi that's $8 a month per terabyte, includes immutable backups and things like that, probably the way to go. Now, you can present something like Wasabi through your Cloud Connect server, okay, and you'll have to do that if they only have standalone agents. If the customer has their own backup and replication instance, you can present the Wasabi bucket directly to them. And I'm just using Wasabi as an example. You can use, Azure Blob, AWS S3. There's a big list. But typically, most service providers, they position this behind their Cloud Connect so that the customer isn't connected directly to that Wasabi bucket with the credentials and all that. It's behind the service provider's Cloud Connect, okay? This option is kind of the best of both worlds. There's a little bit of do-it-yourself, but it's pretty easy. I've got a video on creating Wasabi bucket. It doesn't take long at all to learn. And it's not that expensive, but there is a little bit of do-it-yourself. There's the whole shared responsibility model of using the public cloud. And the third option, this is the most expensive option, but it's also the easiest. Just pay somebody else to do it, right? So we have a whole list of service providers. These are, official Veeam cloud service providers that are that work with Veeam, and they're using Cloud Connect just like you would in your own data center, but they're just doing it for you. They don't work with your customers, right? They're just saying, tell me what you need. Do you need some storage? Do you need some hypervisor space? Whatever. I'll give you what you need. I'll even let you access my service provider console. A lot of partners do that. It's going to be the priciest option, but again, the easiest option, right? All right, well, it looks like we're already 22 minutes into this one. I was trying to keep it short, so I'm just going to end this video here. I don't want to go on and on. There's some other videos I have that'll walk you through the interface. There's also other videos done by other Veemers, and I'll probably make some more videos showing through the GUI, and of course you can always reach out for a personalized demo, but I hope this helps, and until next time, keep on Veeming in the free world.